Good afternoon, everyone. I know you're all still enjoying your desserts. Sorry to interrupt the conversations that are taking place, but I am very happy to be here on behalf of Bruce Power. So Bruce Power, in case you're unfamiliar with who we are, what we do, we are the nuclear generating facility over on the shores of Lake Huron. From that site, we produce about a third of Ontario's electricity and a good chunk of the world's medical isotopes that are used all across the healthcare system to fight cancer and sterilize single-use medical devices. So a neat role we play, and worth mentioning that we are a P3. And as we invest in the refurbishment, the life extension of our site, this is all done using private dollars through a P3 model that we've established with the province of Ontario and the system operator that manages to de-risk capital and de-risk investment and reduce costs and risk for taxpayers in Ontario. And ultimately, it helps to secure electricity, clean electricity, for decades to come. I'm also very proud today to be introducing David Coletto, who is the founder, chair, and CEO of Abacus Data. So you may have already heard of David. He plays a huge role in communicating valuable information that we all use to make decisions and that policymakers use to make their decisions in the way they form investment, invest in infrastructure, and make decisions in terms of how to allocate capital, how to prioritize projects. And that's something that obviously as nuclear providers, we pay close attention to, and that you in the room will want to obviously know more about as you move forward with your projects and advocate for your policy priorities. So with no further ado, I'd like to welcome David to the stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Pat and Bruce Power, for sponsoring this keynote. Enjoy your dessert. My name's David Coletto. I am a pollster. Now, the other day, my wife sends me a text. I've been on the road for a while, and she says, the neighbor came up to me and said, I'm looking to redo the interior of my house, and I hear your husband's in the upholstery business. Can I get his name? I'm going to keep it in the neighborhood, and anyways. Not an upholster, although that might be a future career for me. I have this amazing privilege in the job that I do, and I get to ask hundreds of questions to thousands of Canadians every week on issues ranging from how they feel about their relationships, to work, to what they're buying, and something I'm particularly passionate about, which is how all those things connect to how they feel about politics and public policy. And so I'm here today to give you just a brief introduction into the world that I see through the eyes of Canadians and really people from around the world who are experiencing a situation that many of them have never experienced before. And when you think about the last 5 years, right, and you think about all the things that all of us have lived through, it's not surprising that in 2022, the Collins Dictionary, like every dictionary, puts out a word of the year. And so in 2022, the Collins Dictionary word of the year was permacrisis. And they define permacrisis as an extended period of instability and insecurity, right? And so you have lived through this. You know what this feels like. I'm fascinated by how this affects the average person, right? That the idea that on any given day, some unknown crisis might emerge. Another conflict in another part of the world, a forest fire, a flood, an economic crisis that's going to make my life just a little bit more difficult. And so this is the context by which today most people in this country are evaluating what is happening, right? And thinking about both their political choices. It's happening in the United States tomorrow. It's going to happen likely in Canada in the next year. And all of this is being set around what I see as a new mindset in the public, one that's relatively new, one that my generation, New York Times calls me a geriatric millennial. I'm early 40s now. So if you're 40 or under, you have never really experienced a situation like this in Canada. And I call that a scarcity mindset, right? And what is a scarcity mindset? It basically means that the things that you need in your life, whether that be food, energy, housing, healthcare, over the last number of years have become harder to get, more expensive, if you have it, say you have a family doctor and that doctor is in his or her 60s and may retire at any given moment, you're deeply concerned you're not going to be able to find a replacement, right? So we become very defensive about that. So I'm here today to talk about what does that scarcity mindset mean, not just for all of your businesses as you navigate what I think is a really challenging period, but how does it affect what might happen in the United States tomorrow, what might help affect provincial elections that we've seen, and also the federal political scene here in Canada. And I'm going to do that by sharing a bunch of data. And I'm a data nerd. I love data. I think there's value in understanding what people are thinking and feeling, right? Capturing the mood of the country. Because if you know what people are thinking and feeling, if you can anticipate an unmet need and be the first one to meet it, right? Politicians are going to react positively, generally speaking, and you're obviously going to be ahead of your competitors when it comes to understanding it. So I want to start with the mood of the country. Pollsters like me have a question we like to ask. Do you think the country's headed in the right direction, or is it off on the wrong track? Right? And as of today, a survey we completed last week, only 25% of Canadians believe the country's headed in the right direction. And to give you context for why that number is incredibly low, in fact, perhaps historically low, I can take you back just a few years on this trend line, and this is the trend line for those who think the country's headed in the right direction. And if you go back to April of 2020, just a few weeks after the global pandemic started, more Canadians in April of 2020 thought the country was headed in the right direction than they do today, okay? And you can see that over the course of that pandemic, we had these cycles of what I call fear and relief, almost entirely matching the case numbers that would come out around COVID, that the entire mood of the country literally rose and fell based on what that number was telling us on any given day or week, into a period of what I called the shortage era, where you saw shortages in labor and goods and services, and then stabilizing into this new era of scarcity. And you can see it's more or less bottomed out and held at this period now for over a year. What's driving that? What's driving this sense of things aren't working? Well, one of them is an immense population growth, and I'm going to dig into that today, and it has big implications for your sector, right? For building the infrastructure that this country needs as we grow our population as quickly as we have. Canada's population has grown by close to 2 million people in just over 2 years. Right? That's the equivalent of where I live in Ottawa as 2 Ottawas being welcomed into the country. Many of them permanent residents, some of them temporary workers, some of them international students, and I'm going to talk about immigration in a minute. But the result of that has been that scarcity, which was already there post-COVID, has only been intensified in people's minds because now there's so many more people competing for fewer and fewer goods. So what does scarcity look like? I ask Canadians, what's keeping you up at night? And they can write anything they want in the results. This is a word cloud that shows them how they're feeling today, right? The bigger the word, the more likely they're using it. Cost of living, inflation, housing, affordability, health, money, climate change is there. You can see all those words. If you look at the top left-hand corner of the screen, Trudeau appears. Either he's haunting them in their nightmares, or I don't know, some people might be dreaming about him. Won't go there too much today. Nonetheless, the fact that he shows up in this chart, that a handful of people in our survey are saying Justin Trudeau is the thing that's keeping them up at night, also reflects how personal our politics has become, right? And this is before we've asked any questions about politics in our surveys. When we dig deeper, we ask people, okay, well, here's a list of issues. Which 3 are most important to you right now? In other words, which of those are going to most likely drive your vote when it comes to an election? And you can see the story is very much the same. Almost 9 in 10 Canadians put either the cost of living, affordability, or housing as one of their top 3 issues, followed by healthcare. That rounds out the top 3. The economy is number 4. Immigration, 1 in 4 Canadians put immigration as one of their top 4 issues. About 2 years ago, this would have been in the single digits. It's the fastest rising issue in our issue sets, now eclipsing the percentage of Canadians who say climate and the environment are one of their top 4 issues. Now, when we compare younger Canadians with older Canadians, we use that 40-year-old kind of cutoff, and we say, are there differences from a generational perspective. It's one of the big stories, I think, right now in Canadian public opinion. Two things stand out to me. Not surprising, if you look at the purple, that's what older Canadians are more likely to say is their top issue. So healthcare is by far something that's on the minds of anyone over the age of 40 as they think about how they're going to access the care that they need. Our system is over capacities. If you build hospitals, guess what? We're going to need a lot more of them. The fastest growing demographic in Canada is going to be Canadians aged 85 and older. Lots of long-term care homes, lots of retirement communities, lots of hospitals, right? But on the flip side, when you look at what younger Canadians are worried about, right, the one that stands out to me is job security. Is a sense that the economy is changing so quickly. We hear about automation, we hear about AI. Is the career I've decided to pursue, or the career I'm already in, going to be there in 5 years? Because everybody tells me it may not, including political leaders who are investing in AI with my own money that might displace me. This is perception, right? And perception's everything in my world from that job that I have today, right? So younger Canadians far more likely to say job security, housing is there, and the rising cost of living are particularly important to them. So what's the impact of this? I mean, the impact fundamentally is it leads to zero-sum thinking, right? When we're fighting over scarce resources, when we believe the things that we need are harder to get, more expensive, it means that if I have it, I'm going to be defensive of it. If I don't have it, I'm going to kind of want to fight for it. And it forces us down the hierarchy of needs, right? To a world where we no longer think about esteem and self-actualization, and instead are much more likely thinking about, can I feed my family? Can I pay the rent? Can I pay the mortgage? And what will I do if I can't? And so this is a new place for most Canadians. And I will say it's not just the most vulnerable in our society who are thinking this way, right? Even upper middle class Canadians. I've overheard a conversation at the airport, right? A family that was, I'm sure, very privileged. A mother was saying, though, look, I think I'm going to have to decide between buying my kids Canada Goose jackets this year or some other brand, right? And we laugh about it because it's kind of ridiculous. That person's pretty damn lucky. But if you can't live the life you've come to expect, that's going to create some friction in your head. The psychology of that is going to ask questions about why. Why can't I do that? Whose fault is it? And how do I punish them in a way for getting me there, right? And so it's really important. Now, speaking about that, and this is related, is immigration. And about a year and a half ago, I was in conferences like this, and people would come up to me afterwards, and if you would, please, I'm happy to chat after as well, and said to me, you know, David, I'm pro-immigration, but, and then they would end that sentence with some condition that was challenging their position to be in favor of immigration. And so that got me thinking, that's, if people are saying this to me openly, then there must be something happening in the public mindset. And in fact, over the course of a year, we've seen a doubling in the number of Canadians who say that immigration is too high in Canada. Today, 7 in 10 think that the immigration targets just on permanent residencies are too high, right? And as we watch what goes on in the United States, or we look at what's going on in Europe, Canadians have this superiority complex where we say, we're not like that. We don't have these debates. Debates about immigration are something we don't have here, but they've come here. And it's not because most of those folks don't like who's coming here or don't want more of certain types of people coming here. It's simply because they don't think there's space for them all. Where are they going to live? Where are they going to get health care? Right? Where are they going to go to school? All those things are questions around scarcity and growth. And so that leads me then to something I've just noticed most recently, and this question about whether growth is a bad word. And so when we ask Canadians, do you think your community is growing quickly? Is it growing somewhat? Is it not growing? Or is it in decline? More than 7 in 10 Canadians believe their community is growing right now in Canada. Very few think it's in decline. And when we look at it from a provincial lens, right? There's a provincial election going on in Nova Scotia. Conversation that province is having right now is whether or not the incredible growth that a city like Halifax is experiencing is been too much, right? And you can see the difference here, and where Ontario and Alberta and BC are relative to the national average. But what's even more interesting about this perception around growth is the distinction that people make between, I think my community is growing quickly, versus I believe it's growing somewhat. And if you hold the view that your community is growing quickly, which about 4 in 10 Canadians believe, you are significantly more likely to believe your community's headed in the wrong direction. That subtle difference between believing something's growing fast and something's growing at a more manageable pace forces people to say, I think we need to change policy. And so it's not surprising to me, right, having seen this shift happen over the last year, that our federal government has reacted the way it has. Reducing immigration around temporary workers, capping international students, and just 2 weeks ago announcing that it's going to actually reduce the number of permanent residents it's going to welcome into the country. For the first time, our policy will be zero growth, population growth in Canada, right? So here is a perfect example of how public opinion drove politicians, particularly politicians who are not operating in a position of strength, and I'll show you that in a moment, to respond to it, okay? And that's important. Secondly, scarcity has led to what I think has been, at least in my lifetime, more labor disputes and conflict than we have seen before. And it's not just between employer and workers or employers and unions. It's in fact increasingly seeing the number of tentative agreements being rejected by the members themselves, that those members are saying to their union leaders, I don't trust you. I don't think you've negotiated on my behalf. I don't think you've gotten us a good enough deal, right? And so construction workers, I was up in Muskoka at the Ontario Construction Secretariat a few weeks ago, giving them this message. Workers know they are in high demand, and they're not easily replaced. And so the result is headlines like this, right? Across the country, in the United States, elsewhere, unions rejecting their members' contracts. Finally, scarcity is also creating a deep desire for political change. And what we see, whether it's at the federal, provincial, or global level, incumbents everywhere are in trouble, okay? And tomorrow, we're going to find out what the entire world is waiting, hopefully, to find out. And there was a great panel just before talking about this. I'm not going to get too much into the political conversations in the United States, but if you watch the debate and you take a step away from the rhetoric that Donald Trump uses, that very much Americans are reacting to a sense of scarcity as well, that their cost of living has gone up, their housing costs have gone up, and they themselves have come to expect a life as Americans that they don't think is happening. And so they're looking for a solution to that story. And the same story is happening here in Canada. And when you look at our federal political landscape today and you think out, where are we going? And what has scarcity done to a government that's close to its 10th year in office, or now in its 10th year in office? A few things stand out. When we ask Canadians, do you believe Justin Trudeau and the Liberals deserve to be re-elected? Only 15% say yes, okay? That is incredibly low. That any customer satisfaction survey, any NPS score would tell you that is, your business is about to just collapse, right? Your customers are drying up. So what's driving that? Well, two things. One, it's personal, right? When you ask Canadians, do you have a positive or negative view of the Prime Minister? This is the trend line going back just before the last federal election. So today, 22% of Canadians have a positive view, 61 negative. Pollsters like me say your net favorable is 39, minus 39. And to give you a comparison, Pierre Poilievre's net favorable is +4. More people have a positive view than a negative one. And Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader, is -9. So Prime Minister Trudeau is as unpopular right now as he's ever been. And just before the last federal election, about equal numbers had a positive and negative view. So he's never faced an opinion environment as he does today. But it's not just about him, right? It's also about the perceived performance of his government, which for some you can't separate from how they feel about him. But when we ask Canadians, which party do you think will be best on the issues you care most about? And I fundamentally believe, unless you're a deeply partisan person who always votes the same way, most voters think that way. They ask themselves, which party is going to best handle the issue I care most about the moment I'm going to go and vote? Right? And if you took anything from my talk today, it's obvious that affordability and housing and healthcare are the top issues. And so when we ask Canadians, which party do you think is best able to handle it? On the rising cost of living, the Liberals are third. Only 13% think they're best able to handle it. On housing, they're third. On healthcare, they're third. Right? Those are the three biggest issues. Those are the ones driving the scarcity mindset, and so few people think they have a handle on them right now. On the economy, they're second, but 30 points almost behind the Conservatives, and only on climate change. on the one issue that Justin Trudeau has bet the house on, but it's an issue that's falling in terms of salience with the public. Do the Liberals beat the other two main parties? Okay. Now, the bigger part of this story, before I wrap up, is what's happening across different generations. And when we look at how people vote, right now, if we ask people how they were going to vote, the Conservatives are ahead by 22 points. That holds until the next election. They will win one of the largest majority governments in Canadian history. Maybe close to what Mulroney won in 1984, for those of you in the room who remember that big election, right? Which will give Pierre Poilievre a lot of freedom and a lot of runway to make changes to the way that Canada works. But beyond that, perhaps the biggest story in Canadian politics, in my mind, is the fact that Canadians under the age, that Justin Trudeau and the Liberals are more popular among Canadians over 60 than they are among Canadians under 30, right? And when you take those millennials and Generation Z and you put them together and you say, what is it about their life today that is causing them to reject a government and a political leader that they overwhelmingly embraced in 2015 and then 2019 and 2021, I think you come back to scarcity. You come back to the idea that I can't afford my rent, I can't buy a home, not going to ever have a family doctor, right? And so what's left, right? Where's the optimism? They're looking for hope. They're looking for something to change. So I'm going to end by then asking, well, what does this mean for you? And with the data that Lisa shared this morning that we did on behalf of the council, I think you start to see from this talk how it all connects, right? That the public has felt the effect of growth. That because of public policy choices that our government made, in very much response to that shortage economy that I described earlier, that growth has created even more scarcity, right? But what we also know is that Canadians believe that the infrastructure in their communities, the roads, the bridges, the public transit, the hospitals, the schools, are simply not keeping up with that growth. They're either deteriorating to the point where we can't use them, or we don't have enough of them. And that creates a huge opportunity to tell the P3 story. Add to the fact that there is almost no appetite for tax increases, no appetite for the public to carry more of this burden because they don't have much more to give, then the model makes even more sense from that perspective. So I think this is a unique moment for all of you in this room to join together, to advocate on behalf of each other, and to convince government that the only way that they're going to, and we have to do this, we have to grow. Our population's aging. We have to create the public license for growth. You're I think, part of the solution to doing that. So I will end there. I have a Substack. The kids have Substacks these days. If you're interested in the intersection of politics and polling, you can subscribe there. But I do appreciate the time, and I hope this has been helpful. And we'll have a conversation now with Pat. Thank you very much.
Well, David, thanks a lot. That was great, really insightful, appreciate it. We've only got a few minutes, so I'm going to cut right to the chase. There's something on the minds of all Canadians right now, and I'm sure everybody in this room, we all want to hear your view on this. I think it's the top priority for all of us in Canada for the last number of months. Who's going to win the election tomorrow?
I thought you were going to ask me where I got my shoes, but yeah, it's the question that I literally have not been able to stop thinking about. I get asked everywhere. I was listening to the ambassador. There was a session of the U.S., and he made, I think, a pretty compelling case about why Vice President Harris is more likely to win tomorrow. And that's my gut. And I say it's my gut because I'm a guy who's usually driven by data, but there's been so many different signals coming out in the last few days. The polls show it's a 50-50 race. Early voting numbers suggest Republicans are turning out in numbers higher than last year, but young people are also breaking records. But at the end of the day, I think as a pollster, and the instincts and the experiences I have in trying to, produce estimates that are going to be accurate, I have a hunch that pollsters have overcorrected for the, quote, shy Trump voters, or the voters that polls don't pick up. And so we'll see. That call isn't very confident, Pat, but that's where I think will happen. Now, she may win the election by normal metrics. Whether that is accepted and is without friction, I think remains to be seen.
So Harris, okay, got you on record.
Harris, long answer, Harris.
And just in terms of how this is all played out in the U.S., how do you think that the rhetoric down there, the positioning on either side, how do you think that ends up bleeding into Canadian politics? And we're going to have an election likely, I guess, in 2025, if not sooner. How do you think that gets impacted by what's going on in the U.S.?
Well, I think it does. I mean, the amount of media, both pop culture media and news media that we consume sometimes is more than we consume of our own news as Canadians. And so we are absolutely following it. I was doing focus groups a few weeks ago, and one of the questions I ask in a focus group is like, it's a warm-up question, but like, what's caught your attention this week? What are you thinking about? And almost everyone around the table said at the time, this was actually a few weeks ago now, it's during the Olympics, that either the Olympics or the US election, because it was just as Biden had stepped out. And so I think as we got closer today, I'm sure that's intensified. I think it is influencing our politics to some extent. I think the focus on the cost of living, affordability, these are universal kind of issues happening right across the West, not just in Canada or the United States. What it does to our own politics, though, is a question that is not clear to me, right? So let's say Donald Trump wins tomorrow night, right? Everyone says, is that going to be good news or bad news for Prime Minister Trudeau or Pierre Poilievre? You get two different answers when you ask Canadians that question. When you ask them, who do you think's best at handling Canada-US relations, the Prime Minister actually does slightly better than Pierre Poilievre. But when you ask, who's better at dealing with a possible next President Trump, Poilievre wins by 20 points. So I'm not sure. I think politically, the Prime Minister probably has a better option if it's Trump than Harris. But I think that you saw the numbers. I don't know if US politics is going to have that big an impact and change people's minds because they're really focused on even their own lives right now.
Yeah, fair enough. And when you do look at, Canadian politics, like top issues, I mean, you highlighted the cost of living's really become one of the top issues. You're kind of seeing climate and environment falling lower in terms of the priorities on voters' minds. We've heard the axe the tax that we're seeing from the right. You see that, the Liberals are positioning as the environment being their number one. How do you think this will impact policies around, cleaner, greener infrastructure, clean electricity, nuclear expansions? How do you see that all kind of getting figured out?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, the first point to note is we've seen a 12-point drop in the percentage of Canadians who say they are concerned about climate change over the course of a year. And for the first time in our tracking, Canadians under 40 are less likely to put climate change as a top issue than those older than them, right? And it's tied entirely to the scarcity theory or thesis that I've put forward. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that Canadians don't recognize where things are going. So don't mistake a lack of salience today with not appreciating the need to invest in our infrastructure, to invest in the energy transition, to invest in nuclear and the electrification that we're going to require to fuel our economy's growth. So I still think that the public is largely there and believe it's a good investment, in large part because the rest of the world is moving there. And I think one of the things that Canadians are wondering is actually what is our economic plan? What is the vision that we have? Because right now it just seems so disjointed, and I think hopefully the federal election provides an opportunity, although rarely do politicians actually lay out plans for giving Canadians confidence that there's a direction. And I think clean energy and the clean economy is going to be a big part of that.
And so even more broadly speaking, infrastructure projects, right? Cost of living, again, it's an issue. We're seeing some interesting numbers around the support for governments working with the private sector. What do you think all of this means in terms of the opportunity for infrastructure build in Ontario and Canada, all across the country?
Yeah, I think just building off what I shared in my keynote, I think there's this alignment. I always like to say that public policymakers, particularly elected officials, typically change policy or change direction or keep moving in a certain direction if three conditions have to exist, right? That the public recognizes there's a problem, The public recognizes that the solutions exist to solve them, and that two, it's meaningful enough and important enough that they're willing to possibly, change their political behavior because of it. And infrastructure, while not sexy, and you heard this 100 times, I'm sure, not the thing that everybody's talking about, is actually the connector to everything else, right? I work with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, right? They talk about housing. You can't build the number of homes we need to build without the infrastructure in place to support them, right? You can't solve for our aging population if we don't build the healthcare infrastructure that's needed to support them and a growing population at the same time. So affordability, when Canadians say affordability is top of mind, that's real, and but I think we're moving from that being the primary focus to cost being the scarcity driver to a lack of access being the scarcity driver. And that then just creates immense opportunity, as I said, for the sector. And the challenge is that, as I laid out, all of you in the construction business right now have to find workers to build all the infrastructure. And the public environment has now pushed immigration to a point where it may be even harder and harder to find that. So this is the nature of public opinion and its effect, I think, on public policy.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's a great moment for us and the P3s in general. So thank you very much for all your insight. I do have to disagree with you on one point. Infrastructure is sexy. You're wrong about that.
All right, I like it.
And thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Pat. Thank you.
So this concludes the programming for the Grand Ballroom. Please feel free to attend the breakout sessions. Thank you all.
Thanks, David.